I really need to piss, Malfoy said softly. Think I can? Harry swallowed again and craned his neck. He shot Malfoy a distrustful look, and trying to conceive the most loathsome look he could muster, glanced down. Malfoy's cock, and Harry was struck once again by how absolutely perfect it was pressed against his stomach. It was then that Harry realized that Malfoy had removed his robe. Just as he'd imagined it in his countless fantasies, the dark pink tip that poked out from the layer of foreskin was leaking, a small, glistening rivulet of creamish cum, moving down the long shaft. Harry licked his lips and imagined once again himself dropping to his knees and taking that beautiful cock into his mouth. No way in bloody hell, Harry whispered, eyes stuck on his erection. Harry couldn't see, but he was sure that Malfoy was smirking. Oh, I'm sure I could. Detecting a challenge, and never one to turn one down, Harry lifted his eyes and glared. Prove it then. Somewhere in the back of his mind, alarms were going off, alerting him that perhaps that hadn't been the best plan of action to take. Malfoy was tricking him somehow. He had to be. Sooner or later, when he humiliated him enough, he was going to expose Harry for the perverted shit-lifter he was. His libido, which had become a rather prominent force in Harry's life during the past couple of years, was doing a rather impressive job of throwing his common sense somewhere very, very far away. Harry thought, while Malfoy shot him a feral grin and turned towards the urinal once again, that he didn't miss it. You're bluffing, Malfoy, he argued as Malfoy closed his eyes and took a steady breath. Let's wager on it, then. Harry's wariness returned to him tenfold. If I manage to piss right now, Malfoy continued, eyes still closed, you're going to let me piss on your cock. Harry gaped. Malfoy, he stopped, not knowing how to continue. What would he have said anyway? That it was gross, that it was disgusting, that Malfoy was absolutely sick in the head? Not quite, when Harry could imagine nothing less erotic than having Malfoy pee all over his cock while he stroked himself. Malfoy must have seen the raw desire in his face because he snorted, and when Harry glanced up, he quickly looked away. Well, he prompted. And what do I get if I win? It was unrealistic, but Malfoy's eyes seemed to darken even farther. I'll let you piss on me. Harry bit his lip to stifle the groan that threatened to surface. Now be quiet, would you? I need to concentrate. Harry grunted, but nevertheless shut up. Malfoy once again closed his eyes, and his face took on a pinched, highly concentrated expression. Moments of absolute quiet passed, and Harry continued to stare at Malfoy, squirming in the discomfort of his own restricted erection. He was becoming annoyed, because obviously Malfoy wouldn't be able to, and hated that he was feeling so bloody disappointed. Something was very, very wrong with his person. Harry rolled his eyes and opened his mouth to tell Malfoy that pissing while so erect just wasn't going to happen, but the sound of trickling water caught his attention and his gaze shot down. Tiny drops of liquid gold were leaking from Malfoy's slit, falling into the white urinal far too loudly than should have been possible. Malfoy let out a heavy sigh, and at once the droplets turned into a small stream. Harry watched as Malfoy quickly placed his fingers on the slit, hissed, and turned around with bright, narrowed eyes. He gave Harry what Harry assumed was meant to have been a triumphant smirk, but looked entirely like an uncomfortable grimace. Drop your pants, Potter. Harry's heartbeat picked up dramatically. He fumbled with the belt to his trousers, and then with the buttons. By the time he managed to get his pants down and kick them off, his legs were trembling in anticipation. Eager, aren't we? Draco taunted, but the shakiness of his voice betrayed the intended ridicule. Fucking hurry up, Malfoy, Harry groaned, and his hips jutted forward. Malfoy, with his fingers still pressed against his slit, moved forward until he and Harry were barely a foot apart, and brought both hands up to hold onto Harry's shoulders. At once, a stream of hot urine burst from Malfoy's urethra, coating Harry's stomach and cock and thighs in that strong-smelling piss. Undirected, Malfoy was spilling everywhere. It was only until Harry took a step forward and their dicks brushed against each other that it fell into one spot, hitting the entirety of his upper abdomen. Harry groaned, aroused beyond belief. Fighting the haze that's swirling through his head like a heavy fog, he dropped his hand and clasped it around Malfoy's still spurting cock and began to pump. Oh, Merlin, Potter, Malfoy moaned. He dropped his head onto Harry's shoulder and began to move his hips in rhythm with Harry's fisting. Harry was in absolute heaven. He ran the palm of his hand over the head of Malfoy's cock and watched in complete awe as the piss coated his hand and fingers and dribbled down his bent wrist. Malfoy was chanting in his ear, thrusting his cock into Harry's slick hand. Harry's own erection was throbbing painfully at the lack of attention, but Harry couldn't be bothered to take his attention away from Malfoy's cock. The smell alone was driving him crazy. Harry knew that if he so much as touched his own cock, he'd come in a matter of seconds. The fuck is that? Lovely. Happy Thanksgiving from my mom, everyone. Fuck, 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 Malfoy continued to pant in his ear. Harry increased the tempo of his stroking, fisting Malfoy's cock for all it was worth, and when he dragged the tip of his nail lightly against the leaking head, Malfoy tilted his head back and shouted. Harry wasn't surprised when no sign of semen came out. It was, after all, impossible to ejaculate while urinating. He wasn't convinced, however, that Malfoy hadn't had an orgasm, or something relatively close to one. Malfoy slumped on Harry's shoulder and wrapped his arm around his neck. His cock was still half hard, snug in Harry's piss-covered hand like it belonged there. When Malfoy breathing began to slow, Harry moved his head and placed his mouth in by the pale ear. I want to piss on you, Malfoy. Malfoy groaned and ground into Harry's hand. Think you could? He muttered breathily. I could try. Malfoy from somewhere must have the energy to snort. Don't disappoint me. I'll try not to, Harry thought sardonically. This person doesn't know what the meaning of sardonically is. Okay. Malfoy pulled away, and his cock slipped out of Harry's hand. Harry mourned the loss. I want you on your knees, Malfoy. Malfoy's eye once again darkened to a burnt gray. My, who'd have boy wonder was into DS? Regardless the snipe, Malfoy dropped himself to the floor, his trousers bound around his ankles, and Harry's cock twitched at the sight of Malfoy being knee-deep in his own piss. Harry wrapped his hand around his cock and took a step closer. He closed his eyes, squared his shoulders, and concentrated on the urge to piss. Any day now, Potter, he heard Malfoy mutter. Shut the fuck up, Malfoy, he snapped back. Harry dipped his 4 middle fingers to the underside of his cock and softly began to rub the area where the shaft met the head. He moved his fingers in a circular motion. As the urge became greater and the undeniable pressure began to build, Harry bent his hips so his cock was angled at Draco's stomach and let go. At first, the pressure was almost unbearable, and Harry could only get a few squirts out, but as he forced his body to relax and he concentrated on just trying to piss, he was able to get a steady flow going. Harry slowly opened his eyes, and if not for the fact that urine was pouring from his cock, he would have came right then and there. His piss was spraying all over Malfoy, wetting his chest and groin and stomach and hips. Harry moaned as Malfoy took everything of his. When he reached forward and placed his palm of his hand inches from Harry's cock and began to play with the yellow stream, it was almost Harry's undoing. Merlin, Potter! Malfoy groaned as he wrapped his long, pale fingers around Harry's thick, squirting dick. Harry's eyes rolled to the back of his head at the contact. I want you to watch me, Potter, Malfoy whispered throatily. With much effort, Harry tore his eyes open and looked down. His piss flow was already beginning to slow down, the arching stream getting smaller by the second. Harry watched as Malfoy leaned his face under the diminishing torrent and opened his mouth. Malfoy, Harry cried in shock and delight and arousal. His cock, while emptying rapidly, still felt tortuously full. Malfoy took Harry's piss into his mouth and let it spill over his lips and down his face. His eyes were both bright and dark as they looked up at Harry, hooded in arousal. He licked his wet, piss-covered lips and squirted the rest of the urine out of his mouth just as Harry's cock dried up. Harry's legs, which had been barely managing to hang on, caved under his weight and fell to the floor in the front of Malfoy, knees sunk in the bodily fluids that he could not discern belonging to whom. Malfoy looked at Harry and smirked, lifted his hand and cupped Harry's cheeks. Harry shuddered as the went fingertips moved to his mouth and across his lips. Lick yourself, Malfoy breathed. Harry opened his mouth without complaint and let Malfoy's fingers slide in. He moaned over Malfoy's hand and sucked on the juicy, piss-coated digits. Like that, do you? Yes, Harry did. The urine didn't have a particularly strong taste. In fact, Harry wasn't quite sure if he was tasting taste at all, or if it was just the scent that was wafting into every opening of his body. It didn't matter altogether. He was sucking on Malfoy's fingers, and it was like it was a cock, and Malfoy, if his moaning was anything to go by, was enjoying it. The end.